My name is Jim Rankin, and I have been sailing on the Great Lakes, and I'm a piper, have been a piper for this, the Edmund Fitzgerald ceremony for something like 5 years. So one thing that I want to start with is just a connection that I have with the Edmund Fitzgerald. Going to school, my first year at the Maritime College, 1975. In 1975, of course, in November is when the Edmund Fitzgerald sunk. It caused quite a concern at the school, and there were it was a military school, and there were a lot of lessons learned that were taught during that time from 75 to 79. My first ship getting out of school was the Mesabi Minor. The Mesabi Minor is a 1,000-footer, and it also has a sister ship, the James R. Barker. I've sailed on that, and also sailed on the William J. Delancey. At the time, it was the William J. Delancey, and it has since been rechristened the Tregurtha, and right now that's the largest ship on the Great Lakes. They all carried taconite ore, predominantly, on the order of somewhere around 60,000 tons of iron ore on a trip. They occasionally carried coal. We've gone to several generating stations and dropped off some coal for them. During that time in the 70s, late 70s, as a consequence of the Edmund Fitzgerald sinking, there was an emphasis on the new survival suits, and putting the survival suits on and seeing how fast you could get them on. And there were drills that we had, several drills, actually many drills, lifeboat drills, and seeing how fast we could get the lifeboats down. And I know that the Edmund Fitzgerald was well known for kind of being competitive, carrying a lot of ore and delivering it as fast as they could, and maybe delivering a little more ore than each time that they could. And the Mesabi Minor, James R. Barker, was no different. When the 1,000-footers were christened and commissioned, there still was quite a bit of competition in seeing how fast we could deliver this ore. The Mesabi Minor was dubbed Queen of the Lakes. This is the little painting that was down in the engine room, and they were known for delivering and unloading approximately 60,000 tons within 6 hours. And if we could try to best that 6 hours, that was a win for us. Sometimes what would happen is we would overload the conveyors. We'd have to shut down and shovel. Not a fun thing. Taconite is very dirty. It's kind of a purple, dusty color, and when you've got that much of it in a conveyor, it causes quite a bit of dust. One story that I always tell is, the Edmund Fitzgerald did sink not far from Whitefish Point, and there was always an eerie feeling every time we went over or in that area, especially when I was down in the engine room and I was down in the bilges, and there was just a sense of just a heaviness.
I'm Claudia Marasco, and I'm a resident here in the village of Lewiston, and I've lived here for a longer period of time than I actually lived in Minnesota. I was born in Duluth, and most of my childhood revolved around Lake Superior, and the fact that my father worked on an area called the Arrowhead Bridge, and he had been involved in an accident where the coal dock bridge was actually connected. He was the crane operator, and the guy next to him fell to his death. My dad luckily survived. That's why I'm still here. So I lived along Lake Superior in Duluth for the first 10 years, and that's where I really was introduced to the aerial bridge, which is the connecting piece. We know that the Great Lakes itself all has its history, starts with Duluth, Minnesota, and that is the city where everything else involved in the Great Lakes comes from. So my uncle was a captain. He had 3 ships himself, and out of Duluth, Superior, the 2 sister cities, and then the boats would come in and out of the channel there. And part of the beach was actually sandy, and the other part was complete rocky situation. So a lot of people would go down to what was called Park Point, which is where the aerial bridge is. It's a lift bridge. You would go up and down. You had to wait your turn if you were passing over some railroad cars or whatever. And then you could actually see Lake Superior, and you could watch the ships. That's what we did. We watched them come in and come out of the harbor, and it was something that we went to usually most nights of the week. When my dad would come home from work, my mom always wanted to get out of the house. So she said, let's go to Park Point. And their friends owned the actual little ice cream place and the burger place down there. So they'd be chatting with them, and of course I was kind of scooting around looking at everything else, and would get my hand stuck in the telephone booth or do something crazy while I was down there. But we loved going there. And because my uncle was very involved with the Great Lakes, then my father had the opportunity to move and take another position, which would be outside Duluth, another hour and a half up what was called the Arrowhead, which is Highway 61, one of the most beautiful routes in the United States of America, that if you've never been to, you need to make a point of going up there. So we moved, and my dad wound up working in a place called Taconite Harbor, which obviously refers to the taconite, the small pellets that are made of the remains of the digging for the iron ore, the trailings they would call it, that were melted in together, and then it made a little ball about the size of a marble. So those were the pellets, and that's what was loaded in and off the ships throughout the Great Lakes to bring them to other communities, and of course then made into steel. So I also had an uncle that had a steel plant ownership, and so it's all kind of intermeshed with all of them, but it all revolves basically about Duluth. So we lived in what was called Taconite Harbor, which is a very remote area, and there were homes that were built for the workers that were coming. My father worked the Welland crane, which would help load and unload. A lot of times it would be coal or the pellets itself that were brought by the railroads or ships, and it was just this hub of activity. So we were always allowed to go on the boats, and my dad wanted to take us. We could go, and we never thought anything of the fact that that wouldn't be something that, of course, any visitors would be dragged along as well. And my dad was very proud to show the boats. So I can remember going as a really young girl, even in Duluth, and then again up at Taconite Harbor. And one of the boats that I saw, and I believe it was at Taconite Harbor, or again in Superior, Wisconsin, when my uncle would have taken me, was the Edmund Fitzgerald. It also passed our house many times. I could look at Lake Superior from my kitchen. My mother had a pair of binoculars on the window, so she charted the boats and knew what was coming and going. Good weather, bad weather, whatever was happening. But the Edmund Fitzgerald was one that you knew when you saw it. It was majestic. It was bigger than all the rest. I can remember the white part where the pilot was in the top section, the white section, and then of course the beautiful maroon bottom. And I always said Edmund Fitzgerald, and I always thought, gee, usually they have a middle initial, but this one doesn't seem to. Maybe she doesn't need it. And the other one that I would learn later that was such a big part of her story was the Anderson, which would have been the following ship that was trying to help the Edmund Fitzgerald through the rough patch of the night that the ship went down. So I was on the Edmund Fitzgerald, and it amazes me that she didn't make that voyage. But if anybody was going to try to get through that storm, she would.